As artists, I think one of the things we want most is the ability to express ourselves freely. A lot of us also have a little bit of a rebellious streak worked in there, so we don't want to tie ourselves down or feel overly regulated or structured. So we typically set out on our own path thinking we're going to forge new ground and be original, and then we end up getting faced with another set of issues, which usually look like overwhelm at getting started or lack of focus or cohesiveness in our work once we're done with it. In our attempt to be more original, we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And the key to more effective expression of our ideas may be found in some of those very structures that we cast aside. So in this video, we're going to talk about just a couple shifts in thinking that dramatically helped my ability to clearly express what I wanted to express musically. And if you want something that you can read later that goes a little bit more in depth with specific examples of the things that I talk about in this video, I have a free ebook that will be the first link in the description below. Imagine for a second that you're trying to build a skyscraper, but you want that skyscraper to be original, to be really visually striking, but you still need something that pretty much all buildings need: a foundation, a starting point, a structure, something to build upon. And this often entails learning about just fundamental concepts that are proven to work. You don't have to reinvent the foundation. In fact, it's probably going to be better for keeping your building upright if you don't. And I feel like when I was starting out writing music, I was always trying to start from a brand new type of foundation that no one had ever thought of before. But what it really did is give me no place to build from. I was so confused when I would start that I had no idea how to develop ideas, let alone how to put an entire piece of music together in a cohesive way. So I learned to build a solid concrete slab that could support my creative ideas on top of it. I hope this analogy works. I like to start with just one idea. Then instead of constantly trying to come up with new ideas, I try to find ways I can mine new material from that idea. For those of you enrolled in my composition course, you've seen me walk through this process with my waltz in G minor that some of you may have heard. Notice this right here. What does that remind you of? That transition to get back up to the next arpeggio, don't tell anybody. I stole that from my first theme. What does that remind you of? Sounds an awful lot like my second theme. So my transitions for the B section are taken from my A section. That ties it together. And I don't have to come up with something new because I've already come up with that, and it is strong and it works. And our ear remembers that, and they're like, oh, how did he do that, right? Those are the spots that always intrigue me when composers find new ways to reuse things. That's the craftsmanship to me. Structured limitations are immediately helpful to some of us. They certainly were for me, but some people really react against this idea, and I'm going to try to break it down in some ways that hopefully it will make more sense. What they really do is eliminate some of the overwhelm so that we don't have to make all of the decisions all at once every single time we start to write a piece of music. Another issue or reaction against this kind of writing is that restraint requires some degree of self-control, self-discipline. And that might seem like something that could be at odds with your creativity, but it doesn't have to feel that way. What that really means is that we're going to dig deeper into a few ideas, a few concepts, rather than always running away to do something new, which is something that you hear a lot in younger composers' work. Myself included, when I was a younger composer, less experienced. So let's just take our own self-discipline, or lack thereof maybe, out of the equation and replace restraint with constraints. Restraint is self-imposed, constraints are imposed by an external force or external factors. One of my favorite constraints is working with a form or structure that I have borrowed from a piece of music that I already love and I already know works. This is a very important idea that my own teacher introduced to me. when he said something along the lines of every piece has a model. And one of the first assignments that he gave me was simulating, as he called it, which we'll talk about what that means, one of the three-part Bach inventions. He defines simulating as taking the rhythms, the same number of parts, the form and the structure, and replacing all the notes with your own material. Because he knew that Bach had done a great deal of the hard work for me. He had already installed a structure that worked into place. So let's take my simple waltz as an example once again. I can take the bones of it and flesh it out to become something very different. But I know the structure already works and will give me a solid foundation to experiment on top of. I can simulate a new melody and give it a completely different harmonization, which can change the tone of it completely. I could even take it a step further and use a more dissonant harmonic language to decorate this structure. This is an incredible tool, an incredible way to learn form and structure. Because I'm not having to worry about changing everything, I can focus on things like the harmony and explore with more freedom without having to worry about feeling lost. And these were all constraints, but they really unlocked a new level of creativity for me when I learned how to push up against these constraints and forms that were already put into place. And that's where the real creativity or puzzle solving happens. I once heard a quote from the poet Terence Hayes, I believe, who was asked a question by a student of why he wrote sonnets, why he chose to stick to a very restrictive syllable count. And the student was like, "You could do anything. Why do you limit yourself to these very few options?" And he responded, "It's fun to push against form. Imagine doing a breakdance routine versus doing that same routine in a straitjacket. One of those is just far more interesting." Constraints are powerful. They force creative problem solving. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately because I always approach things from the aspect, as I think we would all agree, that music and the arts in general are subjective. And that is certainly true. That is not being argued here. But I do think that there are a few objective truths when we are talking about any form of expression. And one of those is that if my intention is to move another human being emotionally with a piece of music, then I have to be extremely clear in what my intentions are musically. I don't describe it to them in text form after the fact. I don't make them read some sort of treatise that I wrote on what my intentions were for the piece. It has to be done and it has to be clear musically to a first-time listener who has no idea what my background or the background of the piece is. If we're making art that's to be shared with other people, that's our responsibility. The same goes for this YouTube video. It doesn't really matter what my intent is in making this video. What matters is, can I convey it to you, the viewer, clearly and hopefully succinctly. And there's a process for that I go through with each one of these videos where I go through the outline, my talking points that I'm looking at right here, and I just remove parts that I think are unnecessary, jargon, rambling, words that serve no purpose other than to make me sound smart. I'm taking all of that out to try to get to the point as quickly as possible. We have to do the same thing in composition if our goal is to reach other people with it emotionally. Because if we, the composer, are the only ones who understand it, then it's really just an intellectual exercise. I think the beauty of art is that it can reach us emotionally, and that's what I want to lean into and convey as clearly as possible. And that's kind of what separates the artist from the academic. So build your foundation first, learn these few principles that have helped me, which you can download below as I mentioned, and maybe then you can start to explore more freely, building on top of that solid foundation. If you want to dig deeper into specific prompts and limitations that I have used in the past that have helped me make music recently, you can watch this video right here where I dig into that.